In this episode of Palestine Debrief, I speak with Paul Fauteux, a lawyer and an advocate specializing in international law. Paul is also a former diplomat and has served as Director General in several federal departments, including Environment Canada and Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Paul shares a bizarre and rather troubling incident that he has recently experienced. His position as a sports mediator was not renewed, citing lack of impartiality for sending the CDPQ two open letters urging them to divest from Israel. Here's Paul sharing what happened and reflecting on his experience.
And so when I came back, I decided that I had been a passive ally of the Palestinian cause for long enough, and it was time to get active. So I hooked up with Karen Rodman of Just Peace Advocates, and it was Karen who brought to my attention the fact that the Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, which manages public Quebec pension plans, which is in fact second largest pension plan manager in Canada, had $14 billion worth of investments in companies that operated in the illegal Israeli settlements. Now, the illegal Israeli settlements are not just illegal in the West Bank. They are war crimes. They are prohibited by the 1949 Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilians in Times of War. So I thought this was shocking, and that's where I decided to channel my efforts. And I initially wrote a letter calling on the CDPQ to respect international law and to cease to be complicit with Israeli war crimes by investing in companies that were complicit with the Israeli war crime constituted by the illegal Israeli settlements. And so my friend Georges, who was my professor of international law, as I mentioned, signed on, as did a number of other very highly respected lawyers from around the world. At that time, this was in November of 23. So, in the months following the Hamas attacks on the southern Israel communities, no Quebec international lawyers wanted to sign on. This was way too touchy, and we can't take sides between belligerents. So, I was the only Quebec lawyer, along with my international friends, to call on the CDPQ to end its complicity with Israeli war crimes. So, that's how it started.
During that all this time, you were employed as a sports mediator. That's, I think, also an interesting element.
Yes, that's another aspect of the story. So I became employed as a sports mediator in 2021. Yes, so after 30 years in government, the first 20 with Foreign Affairs, and then heading the Climate Change Bureau in Environment Canada, and subsequently the Reserve Lands Directorate in Indian Affairs, retired from government and began a new career as a mediator. And after a number of years practicing mediation, I got a gig as a sports mediator with a federally created and funded independent organization called the Center for Sport Dispute Resolution of Canada. So after the first 4 years, my mandate was coming to an end, and there was a call to express interest in renewing my mandate. So I wrote another nice letter saying, hey, this is what I've been doing for you over the last 4 years. In addition to my 4 years of experience as a sports mediator, I had all these qualifications to be hired by the SDRC as an arbitrator in sports matters as well. So I put in my bid to be renewed as a mediator and to get a new mandate as an arbitrator. So a few months later, I get a form letter saying, "Oh, sorry, we got many great candidacies and you were not successful." So I was really surprised. So I called up the DG and said, "Could I have a bit of feedback? What happened? Why did the selection committee decide not to retain my candidacy?" And she was very candid, and she said, "Well, look, they thought your performance over the last 4 years was perfect, beyond reproach. All the feedback was great, but they did an internet search and they saw that you wrote not one but two letters, because after the November 23 letter I mentioned, the CDPQ CEO Charles Lemont appeared before the Public Finance Committee of the National Assembly of Quebec, because the CDPQ has one shareholder, right? It's the government of Quebec. So every year he has to go and basically explain himself and respond to questions from members of the National Assembly. And he got some questions on these investments in the illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestine territory. And he gave a whole bunch of bullshit excuses. So I wrote a reply and got my 6 world renowned experts in public international law to say why his excuses did not hold water legally, and maintaining the call we had issued in November 2023 to divest and to put in place a transparent process to ensure future investments by the CDPQ would not run into these basic violations of international law and international human rights law.
And
So
sorry, when was that?
that was in May of 24.
May 24.
And so the selection committee had taken note of these 2 letters and decided that, well, he's not neutral. We can't hire him as a mediator. We need mediators to be neutral. And I was stunned. So after I picked up my jaw, I said, hold on. I didn't write these letters alone. I wrote them and co-signed them. I wrote them, but had them co-signed by 6 world-class experts in international law. And the fact that with these experts, I was calling on the CDPQ to respect international law has nothing to do with my capacity to be neutral as a sports mediator and a sports arbitrator. And therefore, I do not accept that this is a legitimate decision. That was the end of the conversation. And then I thought about it and did a bit of research and realized that it was not only illegitimate, it was illegal. This was a violation of my right to equality in the exercise of my freedom of expression, as recognized by the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I wrote a complaint to the Quebec Commission of Rights and Freedoms, Commission des droits et libertés de la personne, and I didn't file it. I sent it to the DG of the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada, and this would have been in March. And under cover of an email saying, look, I've thought about it. You recall, this is what you said. This is what I said when we had the debrief over the phone. I've come to the conclusion that this decision is not only illegitimate, but illegal. And here's why. Read the attached draft complaint. And I'm sending it to you in draft before filing it, both out of courtesy and because I hope that once you read it, you might come to your senses and realize that you're violating my freedom of expression and you didn't really mean to do that. And so let's fix this problem. Let's settle the dispute. So then several months went by. Well, there's no response, and then we have to talk to our lawyer, and our lawyer made recommendations. So now we have to go to our board. So then I said, well, please give the following message from me to the board. I'm sure this was a good faith mistake, and you didn't really intend to violate my right to equality in the exercise of my freedom of expression. So let's settle the matter. And then it took a long time to get a response from the board. And finally, on May 5th, the answer from the board was, no, we don't want to negotiate our decision to not renew your mandate as a mediator and not give you the mandate that you asked for as an arbitrator. So I thought about it some more, did some consultations, and filed my complaint last week. And I amended my draft complaint to reflect all of these subsequent exchanges to make clear that the violation of my right to equality in the exercise of my freedom of speech is in fact intentional. They do intend to prevent me from speaking freely, and they do intend to penalize me by removing my employment with them. And so that justifies punitive damages under the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedom. So it's just been filed. I haven't yet had a response from the commission, but I'll be following up with them shortly.
And all you did is you sent 2 letters to the CDPQ
Had them published in Le Devoir. These were public letters. Yeah,
yeah, they're open letters.
open letters
Yeah.
published in Le Devoir. Yeah.
Signed by renowned international human rights lawyers across the world. I assume
Yes, that's right.
the
Yeah.
six of them,
Including 3 former special rapporteurs of the United Nations on the situation of human rights in the territory occupied by Israel since 1967.
Can you mention their names?
Oh, sure. So, well, Georges Abissab, as I mentioned earlier, was my Egyptian professor and friend. The 3 former UN special rapporteurs were Michael Link, Dick Falk, and John Dugard. And in addition, actually, there was another Quebecois who signed on, but he's not living in Quebec. He is Bill Shabus, and Bill kind of shuttles between Paris and London. He literally wrote the book on genocide.
Mhm.
And he is responsible for the genocide part of the UN Audiovisual Library of International Law. So he's a world-renowned expert, not just in international law, but specifically on genocide.
Okay, and the request is the content of the open letter. 2 open letters were about divestment, or what
Yes,
specifically?
exactly. So there were 2 companies that were singled out in particular because the case invests in dozens of companies which operate in the illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. But we drew attention in particular to 2 of them. One is WSP, an engineering firm based in Montreal that is responsible, that is the maître d'œuvre or coordinator of the Jerusalem light rail transit system, the purpose of which, of course, is to uh, entrench illegally annexed East Jerusalem into the territory of Israel, right?
Mhm.
And Alstom, which is a French company that bought Bombardier Rail and that is responsible for the Tel Aviv to Jerusalem rail link, which crosses into the occupied Palestinian territory and to parts of its rails, and basically is on illegally expropriated Palestinian land,
Okay, 2
and
letters.
thereby assisting in the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory. And this is an important and recent international legal development, because when I published my 2 letters in November 23 and May 24, we did not yet have the benefit of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice that was rendered in July 24, which made clear that the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory since 1967 is illegal, has no basis under international law. And the only legal thing that Israel can do in the occupied Palestinian territory is leave and pay compensation for all
Yeah,
the damage done.
I think the
And
deadline for that
so
is September, no?
uh,
2025. It's September 17, maybe, or 18.
I thought it was July. Don't have it
No,
at
no,
my
the
fingertips.
deadline, they have to do it
Oh,
by.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And the deadline was not set by the court, but by the General Assembly. So the
Mhm.
General Assembly received the advisory, because that's how um, ICJ advisory opinions work, right? They generally are requests from the General Assembly. Please enlighten us on the state of international law on this subject. And the General Assembly, having received the advisory opinion, set a deadline for evacuation by Israel of the occupied Palestinian territory.
Okay,
Not that we expect that to happen, but
of
it's
course
an
they have
important
6 days.
decision nonetheless. Yeah. Yeah.
And they also, so they terminated your employment after these 2 letters, citing
Right.
your impartial. You can't be
You
impartial as
can't
a
be neutral,
mediator.
right? Yeah,
You can't be
exactly. If
neutral.
you're
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
neutral, then you're partial. Yeah.
And I think this is amongst a lot of stories across Canada and the world,
Yes,
where people have
indeed.
expressed their solidarity with the Palestinian cause, and the
Mhm.
illegality of the occupation
Right.
had to pay the price on losing their employment or their,
Yes, exactly.
doctorate
And,
in.
and and as you say, this is happening in Canada and the world. And one of the attachments to the email I sent to the DG of the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada, along with my draft complaint seeking an amicable settlement, one of the attachments was a report in which I was heavily involved by CLARE, Canadian Lawyers for International Human Rights, which was sent in 2024 to the special rapporteurs, and there are several, on freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of peace of association of both the UN and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to which, of course, Canada is a party. And this report to the special rapporteurs on these fundamental freedoms was precisely about the repression of freedom of expression, opinion, assembly, association in Canada by people who, as you said, expressed solidarity with the Palestinian people. And the other report was a report by the Secretary General of the United Nations to the General Assembly on this same theme of repression of freedom of speech in the particular context of Gaza.
And let's talk slightly about the importance of the CDPQ for the because I remember you mentioned that CDPQ was the baby of the silent revolution along with Hydro Quebec when that
Quiet
happened.
revolution, the
Sorry,
quiet revolution of the early 1960s, brought about by the election of the Liberal Party led by Jean Lesage, which brought to an end decades of political dominance of the Quebec government by the Conservative Party that was at that time called l'Union Nationale. So yes, the CDPQ was a creation of Jacques Parizeau, who was an advisor to the Lesage government in the early 60s. And the idea was, well, the French Canadians of Quebec are the dominated and colonized minority. The dominated and colonized majority, right?
hmm
And they are dominated and colonized by the English speaking minority that ever since the British conquest of New France in 1760 has been in control of the Quebec economy. So, one of the tools created by the Lesage government in what was called the Quiet Revolution, or La Révolution tranquille en français, the Tranquil Revolution,
Yeah.
was the creation of Hydro-Québec. Because at that time, all electricity in Quebec was produced by private companies that were either controlled by English-speaking Quebecois or Canadians or Americans. And so the Quebec government nationalized all these hydroelectric companies to create Hydro-Québec. So the Caisse de dépôt et placement was created about the same time and in the same spirit of creating significantly important tools of economic development that would help to bring the French Canadian majority of Quebec out of economic dominance.
Yeah, and of course, the CDPQ is amongst what's called the Maple Eight, which is in the eight largest investment funds of Canada, which
Exactly.
all of which are invested in the occupation and apartheid.
That's right,
Um,
and it is second in size in public pension fund managers, only to the federal Canadian Public Service Pension Plan, which
yeah,
itself, as you say, is also invested in companies that operate in the illegal Israeli settlements
and
of
I
the
think there was a statistic that the Maple Eight
occupation.
makes I think roughly 60 or 65% of Canadians either
Yes,
directly or indirectly complicit in the funding of the genocide because
right,
it holds the pension funds and the
mhm,
private investments of
right,
most public sector
yeah.
Canadians.
Mhm.
And then what's interesting is that the CDPQ was the only investment fund in Canada that was mentioned by Francesca Albanese's latest report.
That's correct. Yes,
When
on the economy of genocide. Who
yes,
are the business enterprises? Which are the business enterprises that are profiting not only from Israeli apartheid, as they have been for a very long time, but from the current genocide in Gaza?
yeah. And I think the latest article, if I'm not mistaken, I read, published a couple of weeks ago, it was in French, indicated that there is some sort of silent divestment happening. Have you come across
Yes,
anything of that?
there was an article to that effect, and it was actually followed by a more recent article, which was specific to WSP. So, as I mentioned, WSP is the Montreal based engineering firm that is in charge of the Jerusalem Light Rail Transit project. They've closed their office in Israel
Mhm.
very recently, and this was published in an Israeli paper called Globe. So you might want to look into that. So I don't know that that's silent divestment. It's
Yeah, yeah.
actually publicly reported, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So if WSP is feeling the heat and feeling that maybe it's not such a good idea to continue to be complicit in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, perhaps Alstom will follow suit, and perhaps the CDPQ will follow suit. But
Uh,
time will tell.
Yeah, of course. By silent, I mean that the CDPQ themselves did not publicly announce this is what we're doing, this is our plan.
That's
It's
right.
like sort
Yeah.
of, yeah, let's just brush off the dust, and
Yeah.
get
Mhm.
on as if nothing happened. Because I think to date, and even as far back, I think of June 2025, when Francesca's report was published, they issued a statement,
A press
sort of
release
like,
saying, no, 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 this is not
yeah,
true.
yeah,
We
yeah,
are not
downplaying
complicit with war
downplaying
crimes. Yeah. Mhm.
the
And in
situation.
fact, it was in response to that CDPQ statement that I took the pen once again to write a third letter, open letter addressed to the CDPQ. And this time, the list of signatories, as I mentioned, grew from 6 or 7 to 15 or 16. Among them, a number of Quebec based, well regarded professors of international law. And it was in direct response to this statement and concluded with by drawing attention to the obvious double standard that the CDPQ is applying in its selective application of its own human rights policy and its alleged compliance with international law, because what they need to do in the occupied Palestinian territory isn't hard. And they've
Mhm.
already done it elsewhere. On 22 February 2022, on the day Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, CDPQ immediately announced it was divesting from Russia because we can't invest in a country that's committing the crime of aggression under international law. So why the double standard? If you can do it for Russia, and you did do it for Russia, and you didn't wait for months and years of open letters and pressure, you did it on the day of the invasion, why can't you do it for the occupied Palestinian territory?
That's what's called the Palestinian exception.
Yes, exactly.
My theory, of course, which I can't say on the air, is because the victims of the Russian aggression were white. But
I can say on the air that I agree with you. Yes,
okay.
absolutely. There is a racist dimension to this problem, clearly.
And throughout all this ordeal, did you ever meet with CDPQ representatives?
Yes, I did. In fact, I met with them twice. One meeting was virtual, and I was on my own meeting with Marc-André Blanchard, who has since gone on to become Mark Carney's chief of staff. He was at the time, this would have been in the spring of 2024. And it was, yeah, it would have been after the second letter, so probably May. And Blanchard's line was basically, thank you so much for drawing our attention to these important international legal issues. And we took your letters seriously, and we spoke to WSP and Alstom. And WSP said that, oh, in fact, this is just a little contract, and we inherited it because of some acquisition, and it's really nothing at all. It's really not important. And so we said, well, thank you very much, and we'll maintain our holdings in your stock. And WSP, by the way, is not on the UN list. So the UN Human Rights Committee asked the UN several years ago to create a database of companies throughout the world that are involved in a certain number of activities. There's maybe 12 economic sectors that are complicit with the Israeli occupation. So who's benefiting? Who profits from this? And one of the things that Blanchard said, well, WSP is not on the list. So, they have this little contract. It's not really that important, and they're not on the list. So there's no problem. And then the other company was Alstom. And they spoke to Alstom, and Alstom said, "Oh, but we're not involved anymore. This is old news, and we've since completed the contract. And by the way, yes, we are on the UN list, but we've asked to be taken off." So I was involved in a follow up to the UN database asking that WSP be added and that Alstom be maintained. And because shortage of resources and whatever political pressure, Alstom was maintained, but WSP was not added. So so the conversation basically ended with, okay, so Mr. Blanchard, thank you very much for that information. If I understand you correctly, you took our letters seriously, and you had two conversations with the two main companies that we were focusing on, and you decided to do nothing. Well, that's not what I said, but that's the impact of what you said, right? You're going to do nothing beyond these two conversations. So that was part of the subsequent letter, addressing these fallacious pretexts. Why fallacious? Because WSP lied. It is not a small project. It is a huge project. They are acting on behalf of the Israeli state, and they are managing a very important project with very significant ramifications. And Alstom lied as well, because they do continue to be involved. It's not true that they are no longer involved. And so there was just so much bad faith, so much false pretext. And so, another letter was produced to denounce these. So that was my first meeting with the CDPQ. The second one came a few months later, and I think it was early August of last year. And this time I was not alone. I was part of a group of representatives of La Coalition Québec Urgence Palestine, so the Quebec Coalition to address the emergency in Palestine. And then we had a physical meeting at the CDPQ headquarters. And during that meeting, with 4 or 5 representatives, which lasted for about an hour and a half, we had taken this very seriously. Well, they want to talk to us, so let's prepare. Here's what we're going to say. Here's who's going to say it. And throughout that hour and a half, we kept hearing the same line over and over and over again. "Oh, we're just here to listen to you. So don't ask us to respond. Don't ask us to talk about our policy. Don't ask us to change our policy. We're just here to listen to you." So those were my two encounters with the CDPQ that I can talk about. There are others that I can't, but they may become public at a later point.
So why are you so heavily invested in this? I think you paid a very good price on it. You lost your employment over it, and you're still persistent on the path of it. So what's it's a,
Yes, I am persistent on the path of it. And in fact, the fact that I was penalized in terms of employment is not so important for me. I'm 70 years old. I'm a retired public servant. I was not counting on this to pay my bills and put food on the table. But I, in fact, consider it an honor to have been the victim of employment discrimination for speaking out in favor of peace and justice for the Palestinian people. And I relish the opportunity to bring this to the attention of the Quebec Commission of Rights and Freedoms, not in my own personal interest, but as an example of the kind of repression of freedom of expression that must be opposed and that must be halted. Um, in terms of why do I persist and why do I think this is so important, um, many years, well, about 15 years ago, after I retired from the Public Service of Canada, this would have been in 2010, I went to a conference where I heard Stephen Lewis, the former, he was actually ambassador of Canada to the United Nations when I joined Foreign Affairs in 1980, and he has a distinguished career as a leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party. And he's a socialist like me. And the phrase that stuck in my mind from that speech was, there is no better use for a human life than to pick a small piece of injustice and try to make it better. So I didn't pick a small piece, I picked a big piece, and
I
I'm
think
trying to make it better. And it doesn't really matter, I think, what piece of injustice you choose to denounce and oppose and try to overcome. But it's important that all of us pick at least a small piece of injustice and try to do something about it, to
I
bring
think this
about
is
the world we want. And I think I'll end by quoting my friend Georges Abissab, who I spoke to a couple of days ago. He's 93 years old. He's spent his whole life fighting for not just international law, but international law and social justice. And he created a foundation called la Fondation Abissab pour le droit international et la justice sociale. And that's why I'm passionately attached to international law, not international law for itself, but as a tool for social justice. And that's why I continue my pro-Palestinian activism and a few other causes as well, but this one in particular. This is the one in which I spend most of my time and energy.
you selected the biggest piece. I think this is
Piece of
doesn't it
injustice,
doesn't
yes.
get bigger than this. It's all
No, it
encompassing.
doesn't.
It's all encompassing. It
It
covers
is.
racism, capitalism,
Yes,
colonialism,
it
all
is.
the isms, all the isms.
Right. And the other phrase that comes to mind is the idea that none of us are free until all of us are free. We
100%.
are very fortunate. I am so grateful to have won the birth lottery. You know, I was born in the bourgeois Quebec family. I grew up lacking for nothing. I could go to university. I wasn't being bombed. I wasn't being shot at. And I have a lot of empathy and compassion for my fellow humans who have not been so fortunate. So I try to do what I can to combat injustice and thereby hopefully someday maybe make their lives better.